welcome to the weekly discussion of how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. This is Fill in the Blank podcast. I'm Ross Strader, and I'm joined by my co-host Keith Abels, and you can follow us on Twitter at AskAsk. You know, I mess that up every time, Keith. It's at Ask FITB. Or you can email us, fitbpodcast@gmail.com. And we also look for the hashtag AskFITB on Twitter. We would love for you to join the conversation. Reach out, let us know how you are enjoying this podcast, and we thank you for being listeners. Keith, how can folks come alongside and join this venture called Fill in the Blank podcast?
Well, they can simply go to patreon.com/FITB. Patreon allows you to support our show on your terms. You can contribute any amount you want, so you get to decide how much our show is worth to you. To do that, go to patreon.com/FITB to show your support. So for our ongoing listeners, you'll know we've had the dollar challenge out there for a while, and we appreciate everyone that has responded to the dollar challenge. And every week you've been used to me giving you examples of things you could spend your dollar on compared to 4 or 5 full episodes of Fill in the Blank every single month. And this week I'm going to hit it from a little different angle, Ross.
All right, lay it on us.
And I got to be honest with you. I need to take a break from searching for all this random crap, because when I am online anywhere, those things follow me everywhere. So if you look on Amazon, in that one week where we found those mesh boxer briefs or whatever for 99 cents.
Yeah, I think that was one of the all-time lows for Fill in the Blank.
Stuff like that, those kinds of things followed me all over the internet. So like every website I went to that had ads, it had that kind of stuff, and then other similar items. I'll just say that.
Did you get any telemarketing calls related to it?
I did not. Oh my goodness. I'm on the do not. I actually registered this week for the do not call list. I forgot. I think it expires after a certain amount of time, so I re-registered. Thank goodness. So no. But anyway, I got to take a break from searching for all this random crap.
All right.
I just do. So instead, I'd like to make a sincere plea to our listeners out there to accept or join in on the $1 challenge. And here's why. Number one, we're a growing show, and there is some overhead involved with the show. Number two, we need to upgrade our equipment. I've heard from several kind of friends and family and other listeners from time to time about there's a little bit of an audio issue from here and there, and I've been super kind of picky and doing all kinds of things with our audio to make it sound right, so that we're both kind of at the same level and we reduce any background noise and kind of echoey stuff and all that. And quite simply, there's only so much we can do with the equipment we have, so we do need to go through a little bit of an upgrade, and the dollar challenge can help with that. So if you are willing and able, we would invite you to join in on the $1 challenge. It's only 3 cents a day, and that helps our very small business get off the ground and upgrade our equipment. So thanks for listening to the show, and you can take the dollar challenge at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/FITB.
Yeah, and it's real easy to sign up. It's a very painless, they make that a really painless process, so it won't take you longer than about 30 seconds or longest at a minute. And you can be signed up and supporting this program. Hey, Keith, so we've got some follow-up like we usually do. And we talked about, last week we were talking about smartwatches and, man, the real benefit of that, real time today, but then also looking forward that, man, smartwatches are coming out, and the technology related to the healthcare is fantastic. And so some of that's been in the news this week, and one of those happens to be Apple's launched another one of their incredible-looking websites. Tell us about that.
So you have an Apple Watch, Ross, right? I have an Apple Watch.
I do.
Do you try to close your rings?
I do. That's a great, it's a great challenge. It's not hard to do, particularly if you, you get a brisk walk in during the day. That always helps. But yeah, I don't like going to bed with my rings not closed.
All right, so that's kind of fairly new lingo, right? I need to close my rings.
Right.
For a while, when Fitbit was kind of the dominant fitness tracker, then you would say, I got to get my steps or something like that, right?
Yep.
So Apple has this Close Your Rings site now that explains to you, if you did not know, what the rings are. And there's a lot of people that maybe don't have an Apple Watch, or they have one and they don't really pay attention to the fitness aspect of it. And this helps people understand what they are. And so I won't go through all of the rings, but as you scroll through their site, and you're right, it is a beautiful site. It's very Apple-y. As you scroll down, it's got the transition from one thing to the next. It's It's a very nice site. But it tells you what each of the rings does, and it tells you a little bit about how you can kind of adjust those based on your needs and your specific challenges or what have you. And it gives you a little bit of an explanation as well. So, for example, it tells you this particular activity is good for this particular activity is good for that, and it really kind of makes it easy to understand why you would want to close your rings. So, for example, the stand ring, you're supposed to stand up for at least a minute during 12 different hours in the day. And so their explanation here says, sitting too much can contribute to health problems. That's why Apple Watch tracks your progress toward your stand goal and motivates you to get up throughout the day. Being less sedentary can lead to lower blood pressure, increased energy, and reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. So there's a pretty simple explanation as to why that's one of the rings that they want you to close. And just going through the brief explanation of each one of these, I think is really helpful. And then they tell you about their challenges. So it is, as we record today, the 20th. And so I've got a 20-day streak going here because last month I didn't do so well on closing my rings every day. And I made a commitment. February, I'm closing them all. And, so I can get, 28 straight days in February of closing all 3 of my rings. And they reward you with these little badges and achievements. There was a Valentine's achievement the week of Valentine's Day. I didn't even realize it was one, but it was. And so I got the special little badge. And so the site's a really cool site that gives you a little more insight into the rings, why they are what they are, and then the health benefits that go along with them. So I think most people would agree the primary function of an Apple Watch, other than telling time, is the fitness aspect of it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and it doesn't mean you're an ultra marathon, triathlete, bike rider, swimmer guy. I mean, it just means close your rings, which is do a kind of moderate level of exercise, 30 minutes of brisk activity throughout the day. Stand up at least 1 minute 12 times a day, which doesn't seem very hard, and then hit your active calorie goal. But when you put all those three things together over the course of a day and then a week and a month, and you kind of string those things together, it has a pretty significant impact on you. And so that's a pretty cool thing. So this site is apple.com/watch/close-your-rings. I'll put a link in there so you don't have to remember that.
All right, well, that's good. Yeah, no, so, and it does. It makes it simple, and it's more well-rounded than just how many steps you got during the day. And how many steps you got in a day, that's a good thing. I always look at my steps and, try to get so many steps, and sometimes I'm pacing around the house and, at night to try to get my last 500 steps or something like that. But it does, and I can't tell you how many times my Apple Watch has reminded me. So if I've set up my desk too long, it'll vibrate and say, hey, time to get up, go for a walk, something like that. So it does nudge you periodically through the day. It kind of roots for you to close your rings. Yeah, so I think it's great. Well, and so the Apple Watch, so we talked about telling time. We used it for fitness, and but we were talking about the health benefits, sort of the lifestyle benefits beyond just an active lifestyle, one that's not sedentary. And then if you didn't listen to last week's show, listen to last week's show. We had some great things, but there was a news article. I mean, Apple Watch actually saved a woman and her baby's life, right?
This comes from 9to5Mac. I'll put a link in the show notes. Apple Watch SOS saved a mom and her baby after a drunk driver hit their car. So this lady, her name is Casey Anderson, shared her story. So she was in the car with her baby, and they were hit by a drunk driver. And her quote says, "The moment he hit us, everything inside the car went airborne. My face took a horrible blow to the steering wheel, headrest, back to the steering wheel, and then to the window. I blacked out for a minute and could not see. My eyes were wide open, but all I saw was black." And then she says, "My hands flew around to feel for my phone, and then I realized I had my watch on and commanded it to call 911. She used the SOS feature, which is when you hold down the side button.
Yeah.
And if you hold that down for a period of time, 5 seconds, something like that, then it will call 911, and it will also send a message to whoever you've set as your emergency contacts with your location and letting them know that you've called emergency services. So 911 was called without her having to do anything but just press and hold the side of her watch. She mentioned that everything went airborne in the car. I'm assuming her phone was one of those things that went airborne.
Yeah.
She couldn't find it. And so the ambulance arrived, put her on her stretcher. And of course, her child, thank goodness, had very few injuries. Maybe it just sounds like, a couple bumps and bruises. But she ended up with a concussion. She was dizzy. and all that. But she had the wherewithal just to press and hold this little side button on her Apple Watch because it's attached to her. It did not go flying, and it did what it was supposed to do. And the opening line of this article, I think, sums it up. Apple Watch continues to save lives by placing life-changing technology in ordinary places. That kind of sums up what our show was about last week with the EKG, the little pad, or the watch band, things like that life-changing technology in ordinary places. I mean, that is the future of these kinds of devices. So this is an awesome story. It was a terrible thing that happened, but looks like it has a happy ending, and good for this lady for having her wits about her, so that, to press that button and get the emergency services there in short order.
Yeah, I mean, it's super convenient, and Apple that's right. They've built those things in, and, so that she's able. So the story didn't say she was in a rural area. I mean, minutes and half hours make all the difference sometimes in those situations, and who knows how long it would have been until somebody would have come upon that wreck and, been able to get emergency services out there. So that happened, almost immediately. And so, yeah, that's a real comfort, man. That's a reason to buy one of those.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it says her injuries from the crash were serious enough that medical attention at the scene of the accident was crucial to her being able to take care of her baby.
Yeah.
So, that's potentially 2 lives that were saved as a result of that. If only the Apple Watch had a breathalyzer so the dumbass that hit her could have maybe avoided that.
No kidding. They'd probably just be able to tell from the alcohol content of the sweat on your skin here pretty soon. You won't even need a breathalyzer. All right. Well, and we just want to go on record. I mean, that's kudos to Apple right there, because our next story is at the other end of the spectrum with relation to Apple, Mother Apple out there. And that has to do with the home. But if you've seen the news, you've seen this, the rings that the HomePod is leaving on tables.
Okay, so here's the headline here. This comes from MacRumors.com. You can't see my eyes rolling. Apple confirms HomePod can leave white rings on wood surfaces with oil or wax finishes. Apple has issued a statement confirming that the HomePod can possibly leave white rings on wood surfaces with an oil or wax finish. The strange discovery was brought to light in HomePod reviews published by, and then it gives a list of these places that all noticed it. And then there's a picture here. Again, I'll post this in the show notes. Apple told one of these publications that it is, quote unquote, not unusual for a speaker with a silicone base to leave a mild mark when placed on certain oiled or waxed surfaces, suggesting the rings are caused by chemical interactions with treated wood. Do you remember one of the iPhone 4 or 4S when they said you're holding it wrong?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, you couldn't get the service because the antennas were built exactly where you hold
your
the
hand
phone.
goes,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, you're holding it wrong. See? And they had this whole press conference where Steve Jobs held the phone differently, and then he squeezed it, and it was just weird. I don't even know how this happens. So this thing was announced forever ago, and it was supposed to ship before the end of the year, and it didn't. And then it finally started shipping in early February. So that means they've had almost a year playing with this thing. Is there not one single Apple employee or engineer or anyone working on this that put this damn speaker down on a wooden surface?
I don't know what that has to say about the kind of furniture that lives inside Apple employees' homes, or, certainly you have the picture of it, the sterile white environment that all these products are being tested in, and obviously not real world settings. And
I just imagine nothing but solid white furniture, like the Johnny Ive, when he's talking and it's just a solid white background.
Oh, yeah, very.
And it's a solid white table with a solid white couch and a solid white everything.
The epitome of corporate dystopia, it's...
That makes sense. That's why they can't see the white ring.
Well, and here's the thing, is when Apple starts selling the coasters that you can put underneath your HomePod, that's the thing that'll be the killer. Now you've got to have a coaster that it sits on. It just boggles my mind that this thing went to the market and didn't know this.
Within 15 minutes of these articles posting, you could buy HomePod coasters from 15 million different third-party vendors.
We should have had a fill-in-the-blank coaster.
I think we missed an opportunity.
I know.
Yeah. Fill-in-the-blank coaster. So Apple updated. They have a cleaning and taking care of HomePod support document that includes a section called Where to Place HomePod. This section includes details on the silicone base of the device and warns that it can cause marks on some wooden surfaces.
That's almost as rich as the the Mac event where the Face ID didn't work on the first iPhone 10. You remember this?
Yep. So anyway, if you have a HomePod, use a coaster. I don't even know what to say about this one. This is just dumb.
It is dumb. And actually, here's the deal. If you have a HomePod, send us an email or reach out to us on Twitter at...
Send us pictures of your rings.
Yeah, at AskFITB. And if nothing else, just let us know what your HomePod experience is. We would be very interested to know real people using the HomePod. What do you think of it?
All right, last piece of follow-up here. So we talked a little bit about Google+. I went and visited my Google Plus page that's still active, apparently.
Really?
Did you know you and I were Google Plus friends?
I'm not surprised. Like I told you, there was only like 28 of us on Google Plus.
Well, I had 20-something followers. You had like 150.
What?
Something like that. They were probably Russian bots. But
they probably were trying to influence me in the election.
I looked, and the last thing that you posted... Let me go find you here. I don't know who anybody. I have 20-something people that followed me here. 2 of them are the same person, one of my buddies that works at Samsung. And neither of his accounts, I don't know why there's 2 of them, but neither of his accounts are active here anymore.
See, I'm feeling like there's about to be a big reveal here. Like, I don't even know. I couldn't even tell you for certain if I'd had a Google Plus page.
You do. Do you know when your last post was on Google Plus?
Oh, there's no telling, and there's no telling what it was.
August 2nd, 2013.
Okay.
And your last post was a picture of the check that bought Alaska.
What?
It's a Treasury warrant from the United States. It's a handwritten thing from whenever Alaska was purchased. I don't know, because I can't really tell by looking at it, but $7.2 million. But yeah, that was in August 2nd. You posted on August 1st, too. You were on a roll. Actually, I think that's the only 2. Okay, you posted something on August 1st. You posted something on August 2nd, and that is it.
I hate to think about what was it? What I posted on August 1st?
Okay. Here's what it is.
All right.
Here's your post. It was a public post, so you just threw it out there to the,
Oh gosh. I'm
I'm
feeling shame come upon me right now.
Okay, you said Google Plus. Trying to understand the vibe here. Different from Facebook, but what are your observations about how this is distinct? What is the advantage? I actually replied to your message.
Really?
And it says, listen to this. Listen to this. My reply on August 1st of 2013 says, Facebook is for old people. Google Plus is for hipsters like us.
That was prophetic, Keith. I think that was absolutely prophetic. So,
and then later I did a separate comment. Oh, actually, you replied to that. You replied to a couple of people at once, and your reply to me said, "Yeah, Facebook has turned creepy and boring. I'm done with it." And then to that, I replied, "I deleted my Facebook account earlier this year. I like the idea of circles in air quotes and the strong tech community on Google Plus. However, it is a bit of a ghost town otherwise."
Well, that's true. I abandoned Facebook about that time and have never looked back at Facebook. So, but I am getting the emails from Facebook that say, "Hey, did you know these 9 people could be your friends on Facebook?" I mean, you can't actually delete an account. You can go inactive, but it just stays there, and that's so maddening.
There's a way you can nuke your account in Europe, because they've got different regulations on, tech companies for sure. But they do have an option for Europeans where you can full-blown nuke your Facebook account. I'm glad you mentioned that because I deleted the Facebook app from my phone this week. I never really used it. And I was like, I'm just going to delete the app.
Yeah.
And then immediately I started getting those same emails about, I never used to get emails like that. Anytime my wife posts something, I get an email that says, "Allison posted blah, 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 blah." and you can click here and go look at it on the web or whatever because I don't have the app anymore.
Yeah.
But they know I deleted the app. And so now they're just bombing my email with all these alerts, just trying to, I guess, trick me to come back. I don't know what. I just can't stand Facebook. I don't want to get into Facebook again.
All right. We won't
but anyway, Google Plus is still
we'll
a
see
thing.
you out there on Google Plus. We have to start a fill in the blank podcast Google Plus page. See what kind of traction that gets. 4 years,
almost 4.5-ish years ago.
Yeah.
We both agreed Facebook was creepy and terrible, and zero has happened since then to change our minds, and we're still talking about it.
Well, and surely we weren't the only ones, and I'm just so
No,
surprised.
The other 20 people on there were talking about it too.
Yeah, I'm so surprised Google Plus could not figure out a way to hit the market, because I'm imagining we represented some wave of dissatisfaction with Facebook, and I'm sure that wave comes through here and there. And so back, summer of 2013, whatever was going on with Facebook, I'd finally had enough, and I'm sure there were a lot of people in Google sort of missed the window to capitalize upon that. If it was even a thing they could capitalize on, who knows? Who knows? Well, so let's get into the topic today, Keith. Let's get into what we're going to talk about. And one of the things that's been in the news, certainly related to technology, certainly related to the technology of today and how it impacts the world tomorrow, and that is related to how is news distributed. So, how do you get your news? One, because that has changed dramatically over the last 5 or 6 years. How do you get your news? Where do you get your news from? And because the news industry has changed so radically, some of the safeguards, some of the professionalism, some of the ethics got left behind, and we seem to be in this whole new era of news, production and places we get our, and it seems to be a free for all. It seems to be that it's very unclear what the rules are, what the boundaries are, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So, it started out this way. How do you get your news? Where do you get your news from, Keith?
Well, I've gone through many different phases. So you've got traditional publications like magazines and newspapers, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got, the evening news or the morning news or whatever, network news or, God forbid, cable news. So you've got TV, you've got print, and then you've got kind of digital. And digital gets broken up into things like the digital version of the newspaper you like. If you subscribe to, say, the New York Times, do you use the New York Times app, so on and so forth.
Right.
So you've got that form of digital. And then you've got news aggregators or content aggregators like Apple News or Flipboard or even an RSS reader, if anybody still uses those, which is probably not. And then you've got social media, which is a different type of aggregator because it's, just all kinds of information. News is just part of it. And then the end user gets to decide, which news sources they kind of follow or like or whatever, right? So whether you're Facebook or Twitter. So I kind of use a combination of the aggregators with Twitter. And then also, I just remembered I have a subscription to a newspaper that gets delivered electronically that I've been just too lazy to ever cancel. And I sent them an email today because you couldn't just cancel it online. They wanted you to call, which I thought was kind of crappy.
It is.
And I may end up keeping that one, or I may find another one because of the conversation that we're about to have. So I am a mixture of, technically I do have a traditional newspaper subscription, but it's delivered electronically.
And does it come every day? I mean, every morning you wake up and you've got that in your inbox?
Yep.
Okay.
I sure do. And then I use Apple News a lot. I was a diehard Flipboard user for years, and I still like Flipboard, but Apple News is just really convenient. And then I also use Twitter, and I follow primarily, news-wise, I follow a handful of what I consider credible news outlets. And, your mileage may vary. Your opinion may vary on what you consider credible. So that's where I get my news. Ross, how about you? Where do you get yours?
Well, so I would say probably the same thing. We actually, in our home, still like having a newspaper, and it has less to do with the quality or content, and more has to do with just something about holding a newspaper. There's I don't even know if it's nostalgic. It just feels more real that, hey, it went through a printing press and there it is. It got rolled up and somebody delivered it to you. Although I wouldn't say that's probably my best source of news. I mean, so for local news, I think it's a good, if you care about and keep up with your local news, which I think everybody should to some degree. And so that's a great place for local news. It is not very good for world news. Most of the world news that comes out in a traditional paper is stale. I mean, I've already seen that because it's come through something else. But I also use the aggregator, and I like both Flipboard and Apple News, and some of it just depends on my mood. I like how they're laid out. I mean, they're different. How they're laid out differently. How they, send. You read one thing, and then it gives you a list of, on Flipboard, and it gives you a list of 3 or 4 other things you might be interested in. I like how Flipboard does that. I also like the scroll of the Apple News. I think it's really easy. You set up your things that you're interested in. So whether it's tech news or business news or sports news or that, and it seems to aggregate, the top stories of the day or the top stories of the week, and so it's a good way, very much like a newspaper, skim through, catch up on what's going on, and drop in where you want to. And then I would say the other thing, sort of during the day, it is Twitter that is my primary news source. So you have the opportunity. That's the great thing about Twitter. You can follow all the news organizations, any ones you want. So you can tailor that to what you want, or you can, balance that out so that you're getting a balanced, opinions on both sides about events that come out. And so Twitter seems to be, during the day, the easiest way for me to check a news feed and see what's going on. And Twitter itself, I mean, you can just go search a news story and find out how people are commenting, how people are responding to news, and I always think that's interesting as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned Flipboard. Flipboard to me is probably the best designed app out there.
Yeah.
Because, the name, Flipboard, I mean, you flip through this thing, just the visual elements of Flipboard, I think, are just very well done, especially on something like an iPad. And, it's like you're turning pages or, flipping from one thing to the next. It's just very well laid out, very well done. You get to choose the types of content that are displayed there, whether it's, sports news or car news or world news or, financial news, tech news, whatever, right? It's more of a general interest app aggregator, than just news. But obviously news is a big part of that for a lot of people. So I like the visual of Flipboard.
Yeah, and the thing I like about Flipboard is, so it maximizes your experience on the iPad, but then if you pull up Flipboard on your iPhone, it's not exactly the same app, it's not exactly the same layout, but they have gone for, they've tailored it to the very best environment that you can have on an iPhone as well. So I like it in both places, iPhone and iPad.
Yeah, I agree. One of my gripes with the newspapers sometimes, and so I get this, e-subscription of not the local newspaper, but, a larger, kind of close to us newspaper.
Yeah.
And my issue with that is their digital version is basically just a scanned version of the newspaper.
Right.
It's not optimized for the web. It's not optimized for a mobile device, whether it's a phone. So it's the entire, front page, not just above the fold, for those of you that know what that term means, but the full front page. And when you look at that, say on an iPad, and you turn your iPad into portrait mode, then that can be okay.
Right.
But when you do that on your phone, I mean, it's tiny. And, so it's not really optimized for that. And that's one of those things where when you just take an existing item and you just try to, the easiest way you can, just throw that on the web, but not make a web optimized or mobile optimized version of that, it makes it really easy to, or make it really hard for me to kind of really get into that. And that's probably one of the reasons I stopped looking at it every day and just forgot about my subscription until, I've been paying for this thing for like a year and a half and I just remembered. Versus something, a dedicated app like Flipboard that's optimized for each device independently. So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Apple News is the same thing. Twitter, there's not much to it. It's just a scrolling thing of text. It's kind of the same on everything, unless you use a third-party app, which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to be said for the visually appealing news aggregators where you get to plug and play your sources.
Yeah. Well, and so that brings up an interesting question. So I think there are a couple of really good options of vehicles to deliver news sources to you. So whether you like the Flipboard environment or you like the Apple News environment or you like, even on the web, you still have the Google News. You can go to googlenews.com and it aggregates, all the stories from around the world or around the nation. And so there are several places that sort of aggregate news, and I think all of them have some strengths, and we have an easy access to lots of news stories now, and even tailored to what you're interested in. But what has also changed, though, not just the delivery of news, but I think the delivery of news has changed the content of the news there. So, used to, if you talk about journalism, you had newspapers, you had editors, you had copy editors, you had to actually be employed, you had to have a good reputation. And so there were a whole layer of checks and balances before, that news ever even got to the consumer. Internally, the news organizations were, keeping their unaccountability that, and there was journalistic ethics that were at play and all sorts of those things. But now it seems because the delivery of news has changed, the content of news has also changed. Almost anybody can find their way into one of those aggregators.
Yeah,
Don't you think?
Yeah, and that's a problem. It's good that everyone has a voice. It's not good that people don't know which voices to listen to. And there's no vetting of the news, and I don't mean like you shouldn't listen to people that have opinion A versus opinion B. That's not what I mean.
Right.
I mean, you see something that looks credible posted, and it matches your worldview, and so you assume it's correct, and that's it, right? And then you retweet or you like it or you whatever, and it just spreads like a virus, and that kind of access, giving anybody the ability to publish whatever they want and make it look like whatever they want, so you can make it look like something very professional and very legit, and surprise, it's not. That ability is, I don't know. I don't know that you should take it away necessarily. I don't think that's the right answer. I don't think you should censor that. But somehow we need to, instead of building better sources, we need to build better users. And a better user will dictate better sources.
Yeah,
if that
I
makes
think
sense.
so. I absolutely agree. And I also think there can be something in the middle. So maybe it is these delivery mechanisms. So I'll be honest. I typically, I am not very discerning, particularly when I'm on Flipboard, of exactly where an article comes from. So if it's got a good picture, it's got an interesting title, I read it, and I am guilty of certainly not looking at bylines, but also not even looking at, what is the source of this news, and I'll just go read it, and who knows where it has come from. So I think the delivery mechanisms certainly could help out, that there's some kind of filter of, hey, this is true journalism, and then there's another layer of, this is, these are sort of blog medias, and you think about 9 to 5 Mac, or you think about Mac Rumors, or those, and those I think have done well. They've worked hard to have good reputations, but it is definitely a second tier of journalism, and then you've got this third tier of, hey, these are, nobody ever knew them. It doesn't mean they're bad, doesn't mean they're wrong, but you as a user could filter some of that out. So you had, here's your A news sources, your B news sources, your C news sources, and you have the ability to filter some of that out, or at least know what it is that you're reading on, from a quick look.
Yeah, so I guess the issue that we're facing with all this, fake news, and first of all, fake news is not new, right?
It's been around a long time.
Right. As long as there's been news, there's been fake news, period. The ability to spread fake news across the planet instantly, that is fairly new. And that's the difference. Making anyone a publisher, is the difference. And it's good, again, big picture, it's good that everybody has a voice. You know,
Right.
you know, 40, 50 years ago, or hell, 20 years ago, we couldn't get a radio show. Nobody would give us a radio show. You have to have an FCC license and you have to have a station that wants to, broadcast you and all this kind of stuff. There's no way. And I don't know that I want to do a radio show, but thanks to the internet, guess what? We can go buy some microphones and plug in and, distribute a show across the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
We have
That's right.
people listening all over the place, which is awesome. So I'm not saying that, people shouldn't have a voice, but it blows my mind that people don't have, or the amount of people that seemingly don't have the ability to determine the legitimacy of an article they're reading, primarily because either they're lazy or since they agree with the basic kind of notion of whatever the article is about, they're just going to assume it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Or, whatever reason it is. It's probably a combination of those things. And everybody's guilty of that, right? If an article leans towards your worldview, then you're going to probably give it the benefit of the doubt. And if it doesn't, you're going to probably say this story is fake or wrong or whatever. Yeah. And the difference is, you mentioned the standards applied to, journalists. If the New York Times publishes something or the Washington Post or whatever, pick a newspaper, if they publish something that turns out to be damaging to someone, they can be sued for libel, right?
Absolutely.
So
in fact,
libel laws have been on the books for a very long time, and they're used, the way that they're supposed to be used for the most part.
Well, and those newspapers employ lawyers for that very reason.
They do, and editors, and
right.
they have journalistic standards. I'm not a journalist, but how many sources do you have, and all that kind of stuff. There's some basic principles of journalism. And, the same thing, if a political ad runs on TV, they're required to say who paid for it. This ad was paid for by so-and-so.
That's right.
None of these kind of basic rules apply anywhere online that I'm aware of. They certainly don't apply to Facebook. And so Facebook walks this line where they wanted all these news outlets to use Facebook as a platform because that's where a lot of eyeballs were, right? And okay, that's fine. But then they would say, well, we're not journalists, we're just a platform. But they're using their platform basically as kind of as an arm of these publishing entities. But then when it comes time to making sure this stuff is what they say it is, nope, we don't have any oversight. We just, everybody can put whatever they want. It's not up to us to do it. And yeah. I just don't, that's another example of them being very lazy and wanting to have it both ways. And I think that the same rules that apply to, basic journalists should apply to any kind of entity that's representing itself as a news source online. Now, how you do that, I don't know. That's easier said than done.
Yeah, and it just depends. So some of it depends on, how the content's derived and then what the content does. So some of this is just sheer propaganda that nobody's trying to make any money off the content. They're just out there trying to, but here's the deal. It's become so sophisticated. It's not even so much about just the average consumer having discernment. So I think some of that stuff you can read and go, oh, I don't buy that. But there is a level of sophistication given the technology of today and, all the doors and windows that are open for, seemingly legitimate news content to slip through that, there is, so there's fake news at a level so subtle that does actually have the ability to shift public opinion, to move it from one degree to a next, and really have malicious agenda behind that.
Oh, certainly. So, all right. So if you publish something on Facebook, for example, let's just say you're calling yourself a news outlet.
Right.
Whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, or even whether it's Google ads or things like that, these processes are so automated, and they're designed to be automated because they want you to quickly be able to publish whatever you want, that there are no checks and balances for this kind of issue. So I kind of imagine this thing like if you register yourself with your platform as a news source, right?
Right.
Then they have some basic, they've got some basic tenets for Here's some of the guidelines you have to abide by as a news outlet. And then if any other companies, doesn't mean you have to, but if you are representing yourself as a news site or news service or whatever on these platforms and you've not registered as a news outlet of any kind, then I think it should say that this is not a verified news source.
Yeah.
Period. And, it's not like, with Facebook, you have to verify your identity to be a user. Mm-hmm. They were even going so far as to asking for driver's licenses and all this kind of stuff because they want to make sure their users are real, but they don't make sure the news publishers are real.
Right.
What the hell? Why do I as the user have to validate who I am, but none of the information that you're cramming down my throat has to be validated? Does that not seem right?
It doesn't. And listen, so we feel so there's a violation there, and we feel it. Imagine if you and I were actually in the journalism business. We were actually in the legitimate news media business. How maddening that industry must feel right now, because they have been, they've been put on a plane to have to compete with, every guy in a garage with a computer. They can build a cool-looking website and make it look legitimate.
Right. Or a bunch of Russians.
Can you imagine the conversation around that conference table when they decided to say, hey, maybe we will sabotage American elections by distributing news and propaganda? You think anybody there thought that it would actually work?
Of course they did. And clearly it had some sort of impact.
There's some smart people, I'm telling you. Smart people.
Or we're some dumb people, which is a little of both, I think, sadly.
And that's what we know about in this country. You can only imagine what's happening all over the world.
Sure.
In that arena. So it really does. It's something that I think certainly needs a level of legitimacy, and there should be some hoops that you have to jump through, because that's just good for society.
Yeah, I agree. This problem is kind of furthered by sometimes people that we trust, retweeting something that turns out to be bogus.
Right.
Or, liking something that, turns out to be bogus. And if you follow, I think, the right kind of people or news outlets, they'll tell you when they got it wrong, because that's what you do, right? You either, you post an update to an article, you post a retraction, you admit, hey, we got these errors wrong. Here's an updated copy of the article, something like that. That's just one of those basic principles of journalism, right?
Right.
But, most people don't. And honestly, I don't remember the study, but most people just read the headline and, like the headline, and then they retweet it or post it or whatever. They don't actually read whatever the article was. Even if it's like 3 sentences. It's like, oh, that's a snappy headline, right? Like if you follow The Onion on Twitter, some of the best headlines ever. Right? That's really what The Onion is. It's just a collection of awesome headlines, because nobody really ever reads the stories, even though the stories are kind of funny. But the headlines, what makes it.
And it is always hilarious to see people get sucked in to The Onion as though it was real.
So I guess the moral of the story is, regardless of where you get your news, there are reputable, credible sources in all of these arenas. So for example, if you subscribe to the paper newspaper,
yeah.
Right. Just a regular old thing or whatever. Okay. You've certainly got different, certain publications are slanted one way or the other, but at least those newspapers, for the most part, I can't speak for all of them, but for the most part are applying similar journalistic standards across the board. Right.
Yes.
If you then therefore subscribe to, the Wall Street Journal's app version of their paper, or the, USA Today, which really you only read if you're on a plane or in a hotel, or any of these others, if you have their app, okay, fine. Kind of same thing applies there. But then if you're using an aggregator like Apple News or Flipboard or something like that, or social media, so if you're using Facebook or Twitter, those same sources are there too. So if you really like the Washington Post, okay, fine. They exist in all of those formats, right? So
yes.
Stick with the ones that have some journalistic integrity. And you're not going to agree with everything that they publish. How could you? But, I feel better about getting my news from those kinds of places, regardless of the delivery method, whether it's on an app or whether it's in Apple News or whether it's, I mean, the article that you read from, whatever news source, whatever major national news source or whatever, your local paper on any of those platforms, is all going to be the same article. So it doesn't really matter how it's delivered. It matters the source. And I think that's exactly right. That's what matters.
Well, I think we'll see, I think what you'll see, unfortunately, since it's not something that's been able to regulate itself, you'll see legislative reform that happens in this year just because of, what has been perceived as a threat to politics, a threat to our society that, that fake news can actually, change or move or influence public opinion in ways that are negative.
Do we want legislative action here?
We never want legislative action. But the reality is, people cannot legislate themselves. They just will not do it. And so not that you can ultimately legislate people to doing right or wrong, but it does create standards, and somebody's got to come and say, here's the line, and you can't cross it. And if you do, there's consequences.
All right. Well, we'll see. I have little faith in any legislative action at the moment.
That's right. Or we could just have a fake news aggregator, something that only aggregated fake news. That would be hilarious.
Well, we do. We have Fox News.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. It just depends. Yeah, which version of it you want, I guess, right? Hey, so let's end this while we're still ahead, Keith, and talk about the blank check of the week. So, your blank check. I tell me about this. I see it written down here, but tell me what you mean. Tell me all about this.
All right. I've got a new app for my Apple Watch. It's called Outcast.
Do you use apps on your Apple Watch?
Well, if you include the fitness part of it as an app, yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So, I use the running portion of the fitness component of my Apple Watch. And, when I go for walks, I start the little walk thing and, those kinds of things. When I go for a bike ride, I turn that on. So I use the fitness part of it. And then I do use a couple of things. I use messages on my watch. And I do use, I use basic things like that. I'm not looking at my photos on my watch, which you can do for some dumb reason, right? You can look at all billion pictures you've ever taken. I've got a Nest thermostat, and there's a Nest app for your watch. I'd never use that because it's kind of on autopilot at this point. But anyway, if you remember one of our earliest episodes, I talked about this app for your Apple Watch called Workouts Plus.
Yeah, I remember this because you can download your podcast on it.
Right. And so it was a workout app, but inside the workout app was a little podcast player because there's not a default podcast app for your Apple Watch. So, the built-in podcast player on your iPhone does not exist for your Apple Watch. It seems like it should, especially now that they've got cellular connectivity, but they don't. And to date, there wasn't a standalone podcast app for your Apple Watch. And so this Workouts Plus kind of built one into the workout app. So you didn't have to do a workout to listen to your podcast, although that'd be awesome if you had to, because it'd force you to move a little bit. But that's how I kind of got around that. And it worked okay. It's pretty good. Yeah. But now there's this app called Outcast for the Apple Watch. It's only 99 cents. I'll put a link in there. And this is a standalone podcast app for your Apple Watch. So the beauty of it is that you can export your podcast list from whatever podcast player you have. And I've got several on my phone. I covered those on one episode as well. But so I could export my playlist or all the shows I subscribe to from one of my podcast apps into Outcast, and then it shows them all, gives me all my podcasts on my Apple Watch. And then what you can do is truly leave your phone at home. When you go for a walk, a run, a bike ride, whatever, then you can either download that episode, which I think you should just download it onto your Apple Watch, or you can stream it over cellular if you have the super fancy red dot Apple Watch. Right. If you don't have that one, then you just download it and you go and you have your AirPods and your watch, and that's it.
And so your Outcast will work in the background. So you start your podcast, and then you're able to switch over to the fitness app and then track your walk and your heartbeat and all that stuff. Is that right?
Exactly right. So it's a simple podcast player for your Apple Watch, but this delivers on the promise, especially of the cellular Apple Watch, the red dot Apple Watch, that allows you to just take your AirPods, take your watch, and go hit the road, hit the trail, whatever. And you've got, connectivity. So if you need to make a phone call, you got it in case of an emergency. If you want to stream your podcast, great. You can already stream your like Apple Music. That was built in from day one because, Apple. But adding this finally delivers on what I thought I was getting out of the box when I bought the cellular version of the Apple Watch. The music part of it was like, yeah, okay, that's cool. I do listen to some music, but I listen to podcasts more than anything. And This allows me to do that. So AirPods, Apple Watch, Outcast for 99 cents. Of course, you got to spend like $900 before just to get to the ability to get the 99-cent app. But hey, the app's only 99 cents. And
talk about the dollar challenge right there, baby.
Exactly. Yeah. This is one they're definitely worth $1. So if you like podcasts, you have an Apple Watch, and you want to leave your phone at home, check out Outcast for Apple Watch.
All right, great, Keith. All right, well, so mine this week is, and I can't believe I haven't talked about this before. In fact, I might even hijack one of these shows that we're in a conversation about and talk about Omni Outliner. They just released their 5th version. So Omni Outliner 5 was released this week. And so I've used Omni Outliner since the very beginning. And so it is, if you're an old Mac guy, you probably know Omni Outliner because I think it was before 2006 maybe was the last year, 2006, 2007. It used to come preloaded as one of the programs in your Mac software, or, so like, how they used to have some bloatware and stuff like that. Apple went through and got rid of all of that and only preloaded their own things. But Omni Outliner used to be included with your Mac software when you loaded it. And it is this, I love it. It's a simple program. It is a powerful program, but it is lightning fast. It's on all platforms. I mean, OS, iOS, they have app for your watch. And so you can write outlines. You can, it's a productivity app. You can do word processing in it. You can, the way that it works, it builds very visual, very sleek, very manageable outlines or text boxes. It has the ability to add and subtract and do much more math than that, custom styles, templates. You can write scripts in it. It is an all-purpose app for if you're somebody that has to write make a presentation at your office. Man, you throw that in there, it'll export it perfectly into a PowerPoint or into Keynote. So you can build it in Omni Outliner, hit export, and that, it's ready to go in a slideshow. So I am a huge fan of Omni Outliner. It's an old program. A guy named Ken Case, he's the CEO, and he's been working on this software. Used to work with Next, used to work with Mac, was part of helping in the very beginning develop iOS, and he's always been on and around this platform, and I think has built one of the very best programs that live in an OS environment.
So this is available on the Mac. It's available for iOS. How do you use this? Like, what's your use case for this?
Yeah, my use case is, so it typically is a place where I will start almost any project. So, I write, I live in the world of ideas, I manage lots of lists, and so it's a place where you can go, and it's a great place for a brain dump. It's a great place to organize material. The files are small. It's simple. It opens up everywhere, and you can use it as a to-do list. They're the ones that make Omni Focus. They're the ones that make Omni Graphel. There's a whole Omni suite of programs that I think are top of the line in every market that they're in.
All right, so I'm looking at buy Omni Outliner 5 for Mac, and you can get the Essentials version for $9.99. That seems like a really good deal. Or the Pro version for $59.99. If this is part of how you make your living, then $60 is nothing.
I think they have, yes. And then when you get into project management, at every step of anybody in a small business, Omni has a solution for it. And I think their tools are the best solutions in all those areas. And essentially, they do. They have buy-ins at different levels. And the essential price mark for $9.99 is more than sufficient for 99% of the users. The pro users, those guys are doing hardcore stuff. I have the pro version because I bought in from the very beginning. And every time they come out, if you're an Omni user from the last one, you get a 50%. Sometimes you can find a 70% discount on the new version.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you said that. It says existing license, upgrade here. And yep. I guess you click on there and it'll tell you what your price is. Okay. Yeah, so Omni makes good stuff. This is a good pick. Do you ever use this on an iOS device? Or is it mainly just Mac for you?
No, on the iPad Pro, I think it's fantastic.
Let's talk about the iPad Pro.
No, I think it's good. And here's the thing. So they just, with Omni 5 in the OS, and then they have Omni Outliner 3 on the iOS, there's parity between them. So now in the iOS environment, you can manipulate the document. It's very clean, and it's very much almost the very same user experience as on the computer. And so it wasn't, though, until this last Omni Outliner 3 on the iOS that I thought they achieved parity, but they've done it, and to me, it's seamless.
Nice. Good pick.
Well, Keith, man, I think that's going to about do it for the show. We're going to conclude this week's discussion of how technology today impacts the world of tomorrow, and we want to sincerely thank you for listening to this podcast, and we want you to remember the fill-in-the-blank $1 challenge. Your support goes a long way, and we will see you here next week at Fill in the Blank.